Spoilers for Invincible Season 2. Before we dive in, let me get two things out of the way. First, I really liked the second season of Invincible. I had my issues with it, some of which I'll obviously get into later in this video, but the show at its best is still some of the greatest superhero storytelling ever put to screen. I will always admire the show's commitment to developing its characters and avoiding easy solutions. Second, I'm aware that Angstrom Levy was never really supposed to be the main threat of this season. He's not as dangerous to Earth as the encroaching Viltrum Empire, and the main threat to Mark in particular is his own dark potential of becoming the ruthless killer his father was. But still, even under that context, I don't think Angstrom's character served the purpose he was supposed to, and I want to talk about that, along with touching on how Mark's emerging dark side didn't really resonate quite as well as it could have. Part 1. Who even are you? When he's first introduced, Angstrom seems to have a lot going on. I'm not in love with the implications he brings for the setting, more on that later, but he's got some kind of grand plan and a unique perspective compared to everyone else in this universe. That's at least pretty intriguing, but it's not developed that much. And his interactions with Mark in particular feel pretty rushed. I mean, let's tally up what happens. Cecil tells Mark to punch Angstrom first and ask questions later, and then Angstrom sends the army of Maulers to attack Mark. But then Angstrom completely backpedals and swears non-violence, but once he's disfigured, he turns back around and swears vengeance against not only Invincible, but his family as well. And that's pretty much where he lands. After that first scene where he changes sides more than a 14-year-old Redditor who just discovered politics, he spends the rest of the season as a pretty one-dimensional villain, pun intended. And what's more, his abrupt turn into full-on evil is never really fleshed out. We can kind of surmise that his fusion with all of the other Angstroms made him hate Mark, but that's seriously complicated by his fixation on tormenting his family in particular. Not only is it a different kind of cruelty from that shown by the Viltrumites, it's just a dumb move on his part. I mean, come on man, you're a super genius who can travel between dimensions. Couldn't you come up with a better plan to actually defeat him that doesn't involve throwing a baby against the wall in front of a guy who can kill you with one good punch? Angstrom also never gets to explain his particular vendetta to Mark, which could have both developed him a lot further and affected Mark in a powerful way. The actual big reveal involving Angstrom comes when he dies. And it's a meta reveal that Angstrom himself was never supposed to be all that important. He was just the guy who happened to meet the bad end of Mark's deadly rage. On its own, that was a powerful scene, and I could immediately see the intent. And I started to gather some more context when I looked into the online discussion of that finale, like when one of my favorite YouTubers, Pillar of Garbage, made a video on the subject stating that Mark himself was effectively the overarching villain of the season. That's an interesting interpretation, but for me, that does not work as a season-long arc for one simple reason. Part 2, Mark is bad at being bad. I'm sorry, but I just can't buy this guy as being seriously tempted by the dark side, at least not anytime soon. He is just too good. I've heard the idea that the label Invincible doesn't even apply to his powers as much as it does to his willpower, his willingness to always stand for what's right, and that's very true in this season. Mark spends the entire season saving DC, saving Atlantis, saving a planet on the other side of the galaxy, saving Earth from Mars, and refusing to bow down to another Viltrumite for the sake of human dignity. All of these come at the risk of Mark's life and a huge cost to his emotional and social stability. The only times he attacks someone with unwarranted or excessive force are against Angstrom, and of those, the first attack was under Cecil's orders and the second was in self-defense, after Angstrom had nearly killed his mom and brother. Mark's act of revenge was a shocking moment that provided a brief glimpse at the man he could potentially become, but it wasn't the culmination of a lot of build-up the way Omni-Man's reveal was at the end of last season. I will say, you can read the show as making a case that someone with the Viltrumites' lifespan and powers will inevitably find it very difficult or even impossible to see normal humans as equals. It's more abstract foreshadowing than an immediate threat, but I think it's there. Even if Mark decides to protect humanity, being the most important superhero on the planet makes it difficult to form normal relationships and learn normal life skills like most others are doing in these formative years. Through Oliver, we see that such a being's non-Viltrumite mother can't raise them for very long. And through Amber, we can see how a normal person caught up in that world can feel like they have no agency, even with the best of intentions on both sides. Amber even alludes to the fact that someone so good at fighting is likely to see violence as a first resort when solving problems. All of these things build up to some unsettling implications, but at this point you might be asking, isn't this video supposed to be about Angstrom Levy? Does he have anything to do with anything you just mentioned? The answer is no, and that's the point. Sure, he vaguely mentions to Mark that he's seen evil versions of him in alternate universes, but that's completely wrapped up in contrived technobabble, not the human drama I was talking about earlier, the kind of thing the show usually does so well. He has no tangible connection to that more nuanced foreshadowing I mentioned until he literally dies. But, well, at least he did die. That was the main point of his character, to show where Mark could go when really pushed to his emotional limits. Sure, there might have been a bit of wasted potential by not fleshing out Angstrom more as his own character, but he didn't have an aggressively negative impact on the show at large, did he? Well... Part 3, did I mention I'm from another dimension? When I found out there would be a multiverse element added to Invincible, I was not excited. The moment you show me all these alternate dimensions where Mark turns evil and fights alongside his dad, the less the events of the main story feel like they matter. I mean, maybe it's just a me thing. After all, I have no problem with all of the alien planets, even though they increase the scale just as much. But what really gets me about all of these alternate dimensions is that there are so many versions of the very same characters. If it's confirmed that most versions of William and Cecil and Amber will probably end up imprisoned or decapitated by Mark and his dad, the more this one anomalous universe feels like an irrelevant footnote. What really gets me are the comparisons it draws to something like the MCU, not only because the MCU is currently burning itself out just as it places increasing focus on the multiverse, but part of what makes Invincible stand out for the better compared to something like the MCU is that it feels like it has actual stakes and tension. There's no obligation to just bring everything back to the status quo to allow for an endless parade of sequels. But the multiverse kind of kills the stakes, and it inserts a cosmically enforced status quo. Nothing Mark does in this universe will change the fact that most versions of these characters are destined to see him as evil. It's not a total deal breaker for me, especially since I can ignore it during most episodes, but it does hurt my investment when I do remember it. So that was my little multiverse rant. I don't like the concept most of the time, but I recognize that most people probably won't have those same hang-up. And even for me, you can do those concepts well. Everything Everywhere and the Spider-Verse movies are instant classics, and they're built from the ground up around the multiverse. The possibilities are literally endless, so if you're going to include a multiverse, you can at least do something with it. Unfortunately, Invincible Season 2 does very little. The only visible impact exploring the multiverse has on Angstrom's character is the revelation that there are evil versions of Mark. And I think you could have the same story beat if he had a different power like, say, clairvoyance. That could work perfectly fine, actually. You could establish his credibility by having him accurately predict earlier events, and you could visibly show his prophecy of Mark's dark fate without having it literally happen in another tangibly provable dimension. On that note, let's keep talking about that visual element. I guess it was kind of powerful to actually see what it would be like in a world with an evil Invincible, but it was a huge missed opportunity to never show these worlds to the Mark of the main universe. The dimensions Mark does travel through during his fight with Angstrom are mostly played for laughs and wackiness, talking with dinosaurs, talking with zombies, playing chicken with DC and Marvel IP laws, and as the climax of an episode that's supposed to lay bare the dark side of his character, it feels so off tonally. I mean, how much more fitting would it be for Mark to encounter his own victims in alternate dimensions, or even talk to future evil versions of himself? That probably wouldn't be particularly subtle, but come on, this is an episode where Mark beats Angstrom to death in the exact same way Omni-Man beat him nearly to death a season earlier. I think it would fit the tone of the show. Having Mark stranded in this desolate dimension after killing Angstrom is also a little more dramatically inert than it should be. The moment quickly becomes less about, oh my god, I've killed this man, how am I going to live with that, and more, well shit, I'm in an empty universe with no way home. We've moved way down Maslow's hierarchy of needs, with the more emotional conflict kind of overshadowed by a more pressing but less interesting one. Mark doesn't get out of this predicament in any way that develops him as a character. He does it by finding a deus ex machina, specifically one that shows us that time travel is also a thing in this universe. Yay! Yeah, I'm sure that won't break any stories going forward. The good news is that once Mark is back in his home dimension, it becomes abundantly clear that the show is still very much on the right track, and I left the finale with a really good taste in my mouth. Angstrom's gone, and since the concept of the multiverse was so tied to his character, it looks like we won't see any other dimensions for a while. And at the same time, everything that worked about Season 2, like Mark's personal relationships and fleshing out the Viltrum Empire, looks like it'll get even more attention come next season. Even the threat of Mark becoming like his father will be a lot easier to care about now that he actually has blood on his hands. There wasn't a world-shattering event in Season 2 like there was in Season 1, but that might be a good thing. The show's world felt like it was rebuilding itself, showing how its characters are adapting to new revelations and laying the groundwork for what's to come. Even if not every aspect of that was handled perfectly, I am so excited to see this world become shattered once again. So yeah, those were my most share-worthy thoughts about Invincible Season 2. Let me know what you think in the comments. Notably, I have not read the comics, so if anybody thinks that something was handled better or worse there, feel free to share. Just try to refrain from major spoilers of future events, but otherwise, feel free to have whatever discussions you want, it's all appreciated. And as always, a like and subscribe are very much appreciated. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.